Hey gang, welcome back to the big board. A little bit under the weather here, but we're going to have a quick look at Assault on Gallipoli. I have mainly as looking at it from the perspective of just seeing what the rules, what we can glean from the rules and how the game might play, and then what this particular game feels like based on some other area games I've played and other war games that I've played that have a similar set of rules or similar theme and mechanical approach to it. So anyway, let's have a quick look. I'm not going to try not to delve too much into the massive detail, not the massive, into the nitty gritty of the rule mechanics. I'll try and keep this at fairly high level for you. But first off, if you haven't had a chance to read anything about the Gallipoli campaign at all, I encourage you to go have a quick look, get a summary view so you'll have a feel for what was going on in the Dardanelles and World War One and why that all happened and how the Anzacs, did their bit and how the Turks did theirs. Obviously, I got some bias being Australian as to the efficacy of the decision to go into the Dardanelles and then the leadership by the Brits and how things are handled. And of course, there's a lot of revisionist history now about all this as well. And none of that, fortunately, is in this game. It's a fairly objective look at the situation, and it's not clouded by sort of political nonsense or views on the situation. Anyway, area-based game. With the card-driven, card-assisted, I would say, activities, and we'll talk about those in a sec. The units, I'm going to hold this booklet up now if the light will work with us. So there's a firepower capability and a strength number, and then a movement number, and they're the things that matter the most. And there's also a range, but that's all pretty obvious, right? There's also a fresh and exhausted side. There are these markers that allow you to build wire, deep trenches, or shallow trenches. And then there's this nifty little idea called killing time, which we'll get to hopefully in a couple of minutes. There are some artillery units and ships that factor into the game as well. They really are just additional units that can that launch some longer range fires. All right, so with that concept in mind, and we look at the sequence of play here, I keep my hand out of this so you can actually see. We determine who has morale advantage, which is going to be the accumulation of your losses over the course of the scenario. And that's going to determine how many cards you get to draw, action cards you're going to get to draw, right? And those action cards are going to give you benefits and opportunities to be used as you activate your units. And then do the ships and all this other nonsense. And then you get to the activation phase, which is the guts of the game. And it really boils down to the fact that whoever has the initiative, which is either a die roll or which may or may not be influenced by a card, I believe. That's not necessarily 100% certain, but just from memory after reading this a couple of days ago, and part of that time I did have a fever, but it's all good. So activation alternates. You activate a unit or a group of units, depending if you have a leader in the area. And then you'll go through these activations. Will allow you to either move or fire or build a trench. And then you have the close combat phase and then victory phase, right? So that talks about what I just said. You're moving or firing or whatever. Movement is bulk standard. You're going to get bonuses from your leaders to move. You're going to get bonuses from your leaders to fire. You can use your leaders to absorb losses, which is a little odd. I hadn't come up with an abstraction to represent what that might be, but these leaders and divisional and corps commanders can absorb losses and assist your guys in not getting wiped out. So of course, you obviously run the risk of losing them if things go sideways as well. But nevertheless, movement so that you can move, and it's one movement point per area. There's group moves that I mentioned to you here. Controlling an area, if you got guys in it, you control it. Now, fire combat is interesting. That there's three types of fire combat, but they're all the same. And the most interesting one is the one called advancing fire. If you can see that there. in the game, activation I mentioned earlier, you can move or you can fire. Well, you can also, if you declare it, do an advancing fire where you move and then you fire. Now, once you've moved, you're going to flip over to your exhausted side, so you'll be firing from your exhausted side, but nevertheless, that's what can happen, okay? So fire resolution is a function of the number of fire points, whether it's an individual unit or a group of units firing together, and that's going to be represented by a number of dice that get tossed onto the table on a D10. And if you get 4 or less on any of those dice, that's going to invoke a hit on the enemy. Okay, and then from there, then you'll have to absorb those losses, all right? So that's basically combat. Now, there is a second type of combat, and we're going to get to that in just a second. There's some modifiers for it, of course, and all the rest of it, but all very, very straightforward. You know, it's all terrain-based, or leaders may influence their capabilities and things like that. When you're doing barrages, there's a chance that you may hurt your own guys. So you're going to have to roll dice for that as well. This talks about the advancing fire concept here, which is pretty nifty. Now, there is one other thing where, yes, and so this opportunity fire is classic. You move into an area, and if the guys are in range, then they can take a plink at you, and they will get to fire before, for example, the advancing fire guys would get to fire. Now, so all very straightforward when you read the rules. And the rules are really well done, by the way. There's no ambiguities in here that I've seen. Things are laid out really nicely. There are a couple of areas where I thought it would have been common sense to have a feature or function of, say, for leaders. There's a leaders section, and it talks about the leader benefits for movement and combat. But then it doesn't say in the leaders section that you can absorb losses with leaders there. That's in the how to distribute damage section, or somewhere else in here. But there's one or two little things like that, just mere niggles, right? So anyway, so once these units will have these strength marker numbers on the counters I showed you, like 3s or 2s or 4s or whatever they are. And so you've now rolled your dice. You've got this number of losses, damage points that you're supposed to take. That's taken off of these units, and you can take losses in the classic manner of flipping a unit over from its full strength side to its exhausted side, or its fresh side to its exhausted side. You could take depending on the strength of the unit, if it's got 4 strength, you could break that down into 2 remnants. There's a concept of a remnant. And you can then, that would account for 2-step losses. You can flip a leader for a loss. So there's a number of combinations that you can use to absorb losses. Now, interestingly enough, after you've taken those losses, you can also retreat. But you can't retreat to absorb losses, which I found interesting and somewhat curious. But there you go. So there's that. Now, the second type of combat that I wanted to share with you and that is in the game is called close combat, and that's when you're actually advancing into the area where the enemy is seated, right? And once you do that, this is where you're going to draw combat cards, and the combat cards are going to be a function of it's either the strength or the firepower. Let me see if I can see it real quickly. A series of rounds, yada, yada, yada. Where does it say? 6 different types. Come on. Firepower. Yep. Based on the firepower. So if I have 6 firepower, I'm going to pull 6 cards. If I have 4 firepower, I'm pulling 4 cards. And then really what we're doing is, what's that kids game? Uno? Is it Uno? Where you've got to match the numbers. So if I slap down an ambush and you slap down an ambush, nothing happens, and we go to the next round. When I slap down a raid and you slap down a raid, nothing happens. I slap down an infiltrate, or actually here it used to be cool. If I slap down a creeping barrage and you don't have a creeping barrage, well, that means I win that round. And then that's good. So you go through that exercise, and of course now some guys are going to have more cards than others, and so you're going to run out, and at some point it's determined that you have lost the battle, right? And then you will then accumulate losses based on the number of strength point. And let me just double check that. 1 second, I'm going to pause the camera. Yeah, this is where it's a little bit interesting, a little bit different. The losing player must take 1 damage point from the units involved, so each unit in the close combat, for each close combat card that the winning player played. So if we've got a large battle, assuming you come in with a heavy force against a small force, you have the potential to, eviscerate the enemy. Or if it's two small battles, you might just take a couple of step losses each. But it's also rounded down by where does it say here? And there's the ability to do withdrawals and stuff like that. The losing player increases his casualties by 2 damage points. Yeah, if you did a creeping barrage, and then yada yada raid cards, reduce damage, allocating the damage points. And so then there's just the process to allocate the points. No big deal. Retreats, I'm not even sure I appreciate the value here, but I guess it's going to give you some benefits of sneaking out. Wire is only applied when you have a card for it. This I told you about the leaders earlier on, and as I said in here, I didn't see anywhere where it said that you can absorb losses here. The ships, same, and these action cards goes into all this sort of stuff. Now the cool thing that's interesting, this killing time track. Basically, it's a variable turn end exercise. So, and it's based on a die roll. So whenever a die roll of 10 on a fire combat is done, I think it is, you're going to it's going to cause the track to move, and that's going to influence when the turn will end. Landings, just die rolling for that to see what cove they land in, whether they're at Brighton Beach or Anzac Cove. And then there's a full example of play. So here's what I think is interesting. To me, it feels like a very straightforward game that's probably got some nice subtleties in it in terms of the strategies that you'll have to acquire the victory locations that are needed to win. But you've basically got, if you take the Storm Over series and something like what's that game? Oh, Sekigahara would be a close relative, I think, of the way that the combat resolution is done. And it feels like it's a melding of those two systems together with the nice theme and artwork and all the rest of it of World War I kind of layered over the top of it. So if you're into Storm Over series games, I would certainly highly recommend you give this a run for its money. It's a fantastic, beautiful presentation. Probably one of the nicest area map games I've seen, bar Sekigahara. I would put it on par with Sekigahara. That's how good it is, and I think Sekigahara is one of the most thematically strong and evocative war game maps that I've seen that represent that for Sekigahara, represent that medieval period. This is less about theme and era and more about just the beauty of the map is incredibly well done. And then once you get into it, there's and the gameplay and all the rest of it, it definitely has shades of World War I all over it, just because it's going to be a deadly game is my feel. I obviously haven't played yet, but so I think it's got lots of potential here, and I will say that I'm keen to get it to the table. This is probably going to be a little light for me, but I do not mind playing area war games, and I have enjoyed some of the Storm Over series. In particular, the Siege of Jerusalem. I playtested that. I thought that was a fantastic game as well. I had a jaded experience, funnily enough, with the Storm Over series. Played against a guy in Austin at a war game store or a gaming store, and we're playing war games. The Friday night was the war game night, and he was such a bad freaking cheat. He would hide the dice when he rolled them and shuffle cards and put cards back in and all sorts of crap to win freaking Storm Over game. Loser. Anyway, and you know who you are. Anyway, highly recommend this if you're into area movement, simple games. You could probably play this. I'm going to guess there's 4 or 5 scenarios in this boxed edition. It's probably going to play pretty quick. I'm guessing a couple of hours. So it might be a good evening game. And this also would be potentially a great introductory game, particularly if you've got someone who's mildly interested in history, and then you could probably set the hook and reel them in a little bit. All right, that's a long video. video. Talk to you soon. Ciao.